Some say the West was built on dust, blood, and broken promises. But for Clara Whitmore, it was built on silence and a man who wouldn't stop watching her ranch from the shadows. The wind rolled over the dry hills of Dry Hollow like a whisper from the dead. Just past the edge of town, where the land turned rough and the law wore thin, stood a worn-out little ranch, quiet, lonely, and holding on by threads of memory. Clara Whitmore stood by the kitchen stove, stirring a pot of beans with slow, tired hands. The walls around her creaked with every gust of wind. Her eyes, once soft and hopeful, were sharp now, watching the front window like a hawk guarding its nest. She wasn't alone. 16-year-old May sat at the table with a rifle across her lap, her eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the window. Her little brother Eli, just 10, clung to his cup of water like it might protect him. "He's out there again," May whispered. "Same time, same place." Clara didn't need to look. She already knew. 4 nights now. The same figure, standing just beyond the fence. Always in the same spot. Always silent. Like the desert itself had coughed up a ghost with no name. "May," continued, her voice thin. "He doesn't move, Mama. Just stands there, watchin'." Clara pressed her lips together and stirred the pot harder. The stranger wore a dark slouch hat, boots caked with dust, and a long coat that swayed with the breeze. His face stayed hidden, like he was part shadow himself. "He's not a ghost," she muttered. "Ghosts don't leave boot tracks." Eli's voice broke through the thick silence. "Maybe he's waiting for Daddy to come home." Clara froze. Thomas Whitmore, her husband. Gone 2 winters now. Disappeared. On a cattle drive, never came back. Folks said he was dead. Some whispered uglier things, that he'd run off, that he'd turned outlaw. She buried his boots and hat under the cottonwood tree with her own hands. That was the last time she let herself cry. Eli's eyes searched hers. "What if it's him, Mama?" Clara turned slowly to face her son. "Your daddy ain't comin' back." The clock ticked on the mantel. The stew boiled, but all any of them could feel was the weight of the man outside, watching, waiting, as if the land itself held its breath. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat in her rocker by the window, shotgun across her lap, and right on time, he came. A tall, still figure, just beyond the fence, like clockwork, like ritual. She narrowed her eyes at the shadowed figure. Who was he, and why? Did some part of her already know? By morning, he was gone again, just like the night before. No sound, no footprints on the porch. Only the faintest marks in the dust near the fence, like someone had stood there for hours, unmoving. Clara stepped out onto the front porch just after sunrise, boots crunching against dry earth. The sky was painted in soft streaks of orange and pink, but the beauty did nothing to settle the dread crawling beneath her skin. She gripped her coffee mug tight and scanned the fence line. Still no sign of him, but she knew. He'd be back tonight. He always came when the sun kissed the hills goodbye. May came out behind her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "He ain't just watchin', Mama," she said quietly. "He's waitin' for something." Clara glanced at her daughter. "For what?" May didn't answer. She just stared into the empty fields like she was trying to read something the earth had written in secret. Back inside, Eli sat with his knees pulled up on the couch, holding a worn-out photograph. It was the last picture they had of Thomas, standing, tall in his brown duster, hand resting on Clara's shoulder, a rare smile on his face. He looked like a different man back then, before the trail took him, before he vanished. "You think it's one of Daddy's old friends?" Eli asked, without looking up. Clara took the photo gently from his hands and set it face down on the mantel. "No friend stands in the dark and says nothing for 4 nights straight," she said. "That ain't friendship. That's a warning." That evening, Sheriff Boyd came riding up the trail. A heavy-set man with a worn badge and older eyes, he tipped his hat as Clara stepped outside to meet him. "Heard talk from old Curtis at the saloon," the sheriff said. "Said you might have had some unwanted company." Clara folded her arms. "He's not on my land, just stands near the fence. But my kids are scared, and I don't trust the quiet." Boyd scratched his chin. "A man who stares but don't. Speak. He ain't just wandering. He's got purpose. Could be someone from your husband's past." Clara's jaw tensed. "Or mine." The sheriff nodded slowly. "You want me to post a deputy nearby tonight?" "No," Clara said quickly. "Not yet. I want to see if he comes closer." That night, the sun dipped behind the ridge like it always did, leaving a red sky bleeding into dusk. And right on cue, he appeared. Same spot, same silence, same stillness. But something felt different this time. Clara watched him longer, studied him, the shape of his shoulders, the way he held his arms slightly away from his sides. It stirred something in her, something buried. Was it memory? Was it fear? Or something worse? From inside the house, Eli whispered, "He's looking at us again." And just then, the stranger took a single step forward. He moved. Not much. Just one step, but enough to freeze the breath in Clara's throat. Through the glass, she could see the dust swirl around his boots as they settled. He stood now just a little closer to the fence line, still silent, still hidden beneath the brim of that dark slouch hat, but different, bolder. Clara didn't blink. Her fingers tightened around the shotgun in her lap. Her heartbeat drummed in, her ears like war drums. She wasn't scared for herself. She was scared for what he might know. "Mama," May whispered from behind her, voice shaking. "He's never done that before." Clara rose slowly, her chair creaking under her. "Get Eli away from the window." May obeyed without question, pulling her little brother back into the hallway. Clara stood at the door. Her hand hovered over the knob. Her other hand kept the shotgun steady, trained on the silhouette just beyond the fence. And still, he didn't move again. The last rays of sunlight kissed the earth, stretching long shadows across the ranch. The kind of dusk that made the world feel haunted. Clara finally spoke, her voice low, firm. "I don't know who you are," she called out through the screen door, "but you've made your point. You've been watching, standing, waiting. Now say what you came to say, or go back to hell where you came from." No answer, not a twitch. Clara narrowed her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. If he moved another inch, she'd fire. But then something odd happened. He took off his hat, just slowly, gently, lifting it off his head like a man at a funeral. The dim twilight caught the edges of his face, but not enough to reveal him fully. And in that gesture, so quiet, so respectful, Clara felt her anger shift, because that was no threat. That was a memory. Her grip loosened ever so slightly. Her eyes searched his features in the dark, trying to place him. That jawline, that way he stood with one foot slightly turned out. Something inside her stirred. Pain, familiarity, confusion. She stepped off the porch, one boot crunching into the dirt. Behind her, May shouted, "Mama, don't!" Clara raised her hand to calm her daughter, but she didn't take another step forward. She simply stood still, facing him, holding her ground. "Who are you?" she asked again, quieter this time. And finally, he spoke. His voice was low, dry as the desert wind. "Someone you used to know." Clara felt her knees weaken, because that voice, she hadn't heard it in nearly 2 years. Clara couldn't breathe. That voice, it wasn't just familiar. It was him, Thomas Whitmore, her husband, the man she had buried with trembling hands 2 years ago under the old cedar tree behind the chapel. She had nailed his coffin shut herself, thrown dirt with her own shovel, laid flowers with eyes too dry to cry. And now, He was standing in the dusk, speaking in the exact tone that used to whisper secrets in her ear at night. Her hands loosened, on the shotgun. Not dropped, just softened, caught between memory and madness. "If this is some kind of trick," she said shakily, "it's cruel. My children are watching. Don't you dare use his voice." The man, if that's what he was, took a step closer, just to the edge of the fence. "I'm not using his voice," he said quietly, "because I am him." Clara felt something inside her fracture, something she had sealed away with every sleepless night, every broken prayer. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I buried you." "I know," he said, "but what you buried wasn't all of me." The last light of day faded, as if the sun itself didn't want to witness this moment. A chill rolled in from the plains. May clutched Eli tighter, her little fingers trembling. Clara didn't move. Couldn't. "What do you mean?" The man pulled something from his coat, slowly, gently. He held it up between two fingers. Her wedding ring, his wedding ring, blackened, burned, but unmistakable. "I didn't die in that canyon like they told you," he said, "but I didn't come back the same either." Clara's mouth was dry. Her voice barely escaped. "Then what did come back?" He looked up at her, and for the first time, his face shifted into the moonlight. Part of him was exactly as she remembered. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, the faint scar above his eyebrow from that barn accident years ago. But the other half, it was shadow, not just darkness, but missing. As if the light itself refused to touch it, like part of him existed in another place entirely. "I was taken in by something," he said. "Down in that canyon. Something old. Something that doesn't belong in this world anymore." Clara took a step back, her heart beating louder than the crickets outside. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back after all this time?" He lowered his hand slowly. "Because something's coming, Clara," he said, eyes burning with strange light. "And if I don't stop it, it'll take everything we ever loved." Clara stood frozen on the porch, eyes locked on the figure beyond the fence. Her heart told her it was Thomas. Her mind screamed it couldn't be. "Why should I believe you?" she whispered. The man, Thomas, or whatever he had become, looked down at his hands, the way a man looks when remembering who he used to be. "Because only I know what you hid beneath the porch stone, your father's silver chain. You kept it there so no one would ever steal the last thing he gave you." Clara's breath caught. No one knew that. Not May. Not Eli. Only Thomas. Her grip on the shotgun loosened fully now, the metal cold against her trembling fingers. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice a mixture of fear and longing. He stepped closer, careful, slow. Still outside the fence line, as if something unseen held him back. "I was thrown into that canyon by men who didn't want me to live. But I didn't die. The way they expected," he said. "Beneath the rocks, there was a cave. Something lived in it, something ancient. It found me, broken, bleeding. It offered me a choice." "A choice," Clara echoed. "To live, but not as I was." He looked up, and the moonlight revealed what Clara hadn't dared to believe. His left eye was no longer blue. It flickered like flame, gold and red and dark, not human. "Half of me is still yours," he said, voice shaking now. "The other half belongs to it." May's voice broke the silence from behind Clara. "Mama, he doesn't have a shadow." Clara turned sharply, and it was true. Moonlight surrounded him, bathed the yard, lit the trees, but he cast no shadow, as if even the earth refused to remember his weight. "What are you?" she whispered. Thomas, if he was still that, didn't flinch. "Something between death and memory," he said. "And I've come back because you need to know the truth." Clara's breath fogged in the summer air. That shouldn't have been possible. What truth? He looked toward the hills, where the canyon mouth yawned like a scar in the earth. The night I disappeared, someone betrayed me. Someone close. And now, whatever lives in that canyon, it's waking up again. Hungry. Angry. He paused. And it wants you. Clara's knees weakened, and she gripped the porch railing like it was the only thing keeping. Her grounded Thomas's voice had changed, not in tone but in weight, like he was carrying something inside him, something heavy, something buried deep for far too long. I need you to listen closely, he said, stepping no further than the fence. Everything that happened that night, it wasn't an accident. Clara's eyes narrowed. You told me you were ambushed by bandits, that they threw you down the canyon. I lied, he said quietly. I didn't want to believe it then. But I know now. He looked up at her, and his expression was shattered glass. It was Silas. The name hit Clara like a bullet to the chest. Silas Dawson? She whispered, her father's oldest friend, her neighbor, the man who had helped bury Thomas. The man who had stood beside her with a hand on her shoulder saying, You've got to be strong now. He sent me there on purpose, Thomas said. He told me there were smugglers hiding in the canyon, that I could earn a bounty if I caught them. I believed him. Clara could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. Thomas went on. He waited until I was deep in the gorge. Then he triggered the landslide. I survived the fall, but not as myself. Clara's hand covered her mouth. Why would he? Thomas's face darkened. Because he wanted this land, our land. He forged documents, claimed you were too broken to manage it, took control while you were mourning, and he was going to take more. Clara staggered back a step. The night Silas had come by with flowers. The night she locked the door before he knocked. The lingering look in his eyes when she told him to leave. The way his hand lingered too long on May's shoulder. Her stomach turned. I would have died in that canyon, Clara, Thomas said. But something else found me. It gave me a second chance. Clara's eyes narrowed. You keep saying it. What is it, Thomas? He looked at the canyon again, and even in the moonlight, his face seemed to darken. I don't know what it's called, he whispered. But it speaks in dreams. It lives in the cold rock and hollow wind, and it doesn't forget betrayal. A silence fell. Then Eli, from behind the door, called out softly, Mama, there's something moving in the field. Clara turned sharply. Out beyond the barn, near the line of trees, something was walking slowly across the tall grass. No sound, no wind, just the long, dragging steps of something that shouldn't exist. Thomas's voice was low now, urgent. You need to come with me, Clara, now, before it finds you. Clara backed up. What is it? He looked into her eyes. The other half of me. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. The field was still, but the thing walking through it, slow, deliberate, unnatural, felt like a nightmare unraveling in real time. Even from a distance, it was wrong. It had arms, legs, a face maybe. But its shape kept shifting, like the shadows around it refused to hold form. Each step dragged like it carried centuries in its bones. Eli clung to her dress. Mama, I think it's looking at us. Thomas didn't move from his spot beyond the fence. His eyes were locked on the figure in the field. It followed me, he whispered. I tried to leave it behind, but it's part of me now. And now it's awake. Clara turned toward him, rage bubbling up under her fear. You brought that thing here? I had no choice, he said, voice tight with shame. It knows what Silas did. It feeds on betrayal, on pain. Clara shook her head. I don't care what it wants. I won't let it touch my children. Thomas's voice trembled. That's why I came back. I can hold it off, but not for long. You need to get the kids and leave. Tonight, head north past Widow's Pass. Don't stop. Don't look back. But Clara wasn't ready to run. She stared at the man, this half-living ghost of her husband, and felt every torn piece of her heart protest. "I spent 2 years burying you every night in my dreams," she said, voice cracking. "I told the children you died brave, that you were taken by evil men. And now you stand here and tell me you're half possessed by something ancient and angry?" Thomas nodded, ashamed. "I didn't want this. But I couldn't rest knowing. Silas still walks free." "And this thing?" Clara asked, pointing toward the approaching shadow. "What does it want?" Thomas hesitated. Then he spoke words that chilled her to the core. "It wants justice." The figure in the field stopped moving, dead still, like it was listening. Clara looked past Thomas, into the black hills beyond, and something inside her snapped. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "Not until I bury the truth right next, to your grave." A soft wind blew. The figure in the field tilted its head, then it took another step closer. Thomas's eyes widened. "Clara, it's not going to wait. If you stay, you'll have to face what's buried in both of us." Clara stood her ground, heart thudding like a war drum inside her chest. The figure in the field had stopped, but not vanished. It just stood there, watching, breathing if it even did that. The night around it felt colder, thicker, like air was turning into fog without permission. Thomas's eyes were wild. "You don't understand, Clara. It's not a ghost. It's not a demon. It's a memory that never died." "What do you mean?" she asked, eyes flicking between him and the creeping silhouette. "It shows you things," he said, voice trembling. "Things you don't want to remember, things you buried." He looked haunted, not by death, but by what he saw after it. "When I lay there, broken at the bottom of the canyon, I was slipping fast. I remember the sky turning black. I remember thinking about you, and then I wasn't alone." Clara listened, frozen. "There were voices in the rock," Thomas whispered. "Not loud, but deep. Like they'd been whispering for centuries. They said they'd give me life, but in return, I had to carry their memories, their rage, their unfinished justice." His eyes locked with Clara's. "They showed me every betrayal that had ever happened on that land. Blood spilled, families broken, women silenced. They said Silas wasn't the first, just the latest." Clara's throat tightened. "So what? It chose you to punish him?" Thomas nodded. "But it's never satisfied. The more pain it feels, the more it wants. And now, Clara, it's starting to feed off you." Clara's stomach turned, a flash in her mind, her father yelling behind a barn. Silas's face, younger, crueler, her mother's voice crying out at night. Things she hadn't remembered in years suddenly jolted forward. "I'm not letting that thing inside my head," she said through gritted teeth. Thomas looked pained. "Then leave. Take May and Eli. Never look back." But Clara didn't move. Instead, she stepped off the porch. Thomas's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "I'm tired of running," she said. "From Silas, from my past, from everything." She crossed the gate. The figure in the field took a single step forward. The ground beneath her seemed to hum. Thomas shouted, "Clara, don't! Once it sees your memories, it won't forget them." But Clara didn't stop. Suddenly, everything around her faded, the stars, the wind, the trees. She stood in a world made of dim firelight and dust. No sound, just memories crashing back like waves. She was 6 again, hiding in a cellar while her father argued with Silas upstairs. 12, watching her mother cry in the kitchen for hours. 17, the first time Thomas held her hand, and the first time Silas looked at her like she wasn't a child anymore. Her knees buckled, and then it was there. Not the figure in the field, the thing inside it. She didn't see its face. She felt it, like ice sliding down her spine. It leaned close to her ear, and though it didn't speak words, she understood. "I remember everything you forgot." She gasped, falling to her knees in the tall grass. Thomas ran to her, catching her just as her body gave out. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from recognition. "I buried so much," she whispered. Thomas held her. "It's time to unearth it, Clara, together." Behind them, the figure vanished, like it had left something behind inside her now. The morning air was brittle, like even the sun didn't dare rise too high. Clara stood outside Silas Dawson's house, her boots coated in dust, her hands trembling, not with fear, but fury. Behind her, Thomas waited by the fence, watching, not interfering. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "I've been silent too long." The house was the same as she remembered. Neat, proud, whitewashed lies sitting on rotted wood. She stepped onto the porch and knocked once. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open, slow as a coffin lid. Silas stood there, older but not weaker. His face still wore that polite smile he'd always used like a mask. "Well now," he said. Clara rose. "Back from the dead, too?" Clara didn't flinch. "We need to talk." He stepped aside, motioning her in like a gentleman. "Of course. You want tea or something stronger?" "I want the truth." Silas chuckled, settling into his worn armchair. "That's a heavy thing to ask this early." Clara remained standing. Her eyes scanned the room, same rifle over the mantel, same photograph of her father and Silas together, smiling. History rewritten in picture frames. "You sent Thomas into that canyon," she said. "You knew what would happen." Silas's smile faded, just slightly. "He told you that, did he? You wanted the land. You forged the documents. You told the town I was too grief-stricken to run the ranch alone." Silas leaned back, exhaled. "And I was right. Look at you now. Haunted, angry. You needed a man to keep things running." "I needed my husband," Clara snapped. Silas's eyes narrowed. "He was a fool, and fools don't last out here." Clara took a slow step forward. "You killed him." Silas didn't deny it. He simply smiled again, but this time there was no mask. "Someone had to clean up this town, and your family had too many ghosts." Clara's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to cry. But instead she closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath. A single word. Not English, not anything Silas recognized. And suddenly, the air shifted. Silas's smile twitched. "What did you just say?" Clara opened her eyes. "They remember," she said. "The voices in the canyon. The ones that saw what you did. The ones you buried long before Thomas." Silas rose slowly, for the first time looking unsure. Then the room went cold. Glass cracked in the windows. The air grew heavy, and from the hallway behind Clara, shadows spilled like ink down the walls. Silas backed away. "You brought it here?" Clara didn't move. "It followed the blood, and you've spilled more than anyone." A shape began to rise behind her, not Thomas, not the figure from the field, something older, something that had worn many faces. Clara stepped aside. "Justice doesn't knock, Silas," she said. "It breaks down doors." And with a whisper that sounded like the breath of 1,000 forgotten souls, the shadow lunged forward. Silas screamed, but it was drowned beneath the weight of memory. The house groaned. The door slammed shut behind. Clara as she walked out, not looking back. Thomas stood waiting. "It's done?" he asked. Clara didn't answer. She just looked toward the canyon in the distance, and the wind, for the first time in years, felt quiet. The sun was rising when Clara reached the edge of her land, not golden, not warm, just pale, like the sky itself wasn't sure whether to move on or mourn. Behind her, Silas Dawson's house stood silent. No smoke from the chimney, no sound from the porch. The shadow she had unleashed had left nothing but stillness. Thomas walked beside her, quiet, each step heavy but freer than before. "You okay?" he asked softly. Clara didn't answer. because truth be told, she didn't know. The justice she'd craved for years had been delivered. But it hadn't brought peace. Not really. It had only unburied what she spent a lifetime trying to forget. She looked at Thomas. He looked tired. Like a man who had finally finished running, but couldn't remember what home was supposed to feel like. "You should rest," she said, almost whispering. He nodded, but his eyes never left hers. "And you?" Clara glanced back toward the barn, where May was brushing the horses and Eli chased chickens like the world had never cracked open. "I still have work to do." They reached the porch. The old boards creaked under their boots, like they remembered every night she'd sat there praying for Thomas to come back. Now he had, but not the same. Neither was she. As Thomas sat on the steps, Clara stepped inside the house. The quiet there was deafening. Every chair, every picture frame, every boot print on the floor screamed memories, some sweet, some bitter, all too real. She walked to the mirror above the fireplace. For a long moment, she just stared. And then, a flicker, not her reflection. Not fully. Something behind her shoulder. A ripple in the glass. A whisper that didn't have a voice but echoed in her bones. Clara didn't flinch. "You're still here," she said quietly. The air grew cooler. The reflection trembled. "I didn't bring you justice for peace," she continued. "I did it because someone had to." A long pause. Then the flicker faded. Her reflection returned. Alone. Clara let out a slow breath. Not relief. Something deeper. Something like acceptance. She stepped outside again. Thomas was watching the horizon, hands clasped, a strange expression on his face, half hope, half sorrow. "You ever think it'll leave you?" she asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head slowly. "No, I think once you've been touched by the canyon, a piece of it always stays." Clara nodded. "I just hope it learns how to live." Behind them, the wind rustled the trees. This time, not sharp. Not howling, just soft, like the breath of someone finally allowed to sleep. May ran up the path, her face beaming with sunlight. "Mama! Come see what Eli found in the barn!" Clara smiled for the first time in days. "Be right there, sweetheart." Turned to Thomas. "You staying?" He looked toward the canyon, then back at her. "For as long as you'll have me." Clara reached for his hand. It was warm, real, still scarred, but hers. And in that moment, the ghosts inside her settled. Not vanished. But finally, quiet. The next morning, Clara woke up before the sun. The house was still wrapped in shadows, but something about them had changed. They weren't pressing against the walls anymore. They were simply there. Like old memories that no longer hurt, just remind. She sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, feeling the steam against her face. The breeze carried the scent of fresh hay, pine wood, and just a hint of rain. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the land was watching her. It felt like it was waiting. Thomas stepped out beside her, his shirt half-buttoned, boots loose on his feet. He looked at her like he was still trying to believe she was real. That this was real? "You didn't sleep much," he said. "Didn't need to," Clara replied, sipping. "My nightmares didn't come." Thomas sat beside her, staring at the horizon. "Mine did." Clara turned to him. "I was back in the canyon," he whispered. "But this time, I saw something. A figure, standing at the edge, watching me." She went still. "Did it speak?" "No. Just looked. Like it was deciding something." Clara's hands tightened around her mug. Thomas met her eyes. "You think it's gone?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the barn where May and Eli were playing in the dirt, drawing shapes with sticks and laughing. Their laughter was real, light, alive. "I think it's sleeping," Clara said finally. "Waiting." For what? Clara looked at him. For the next secret. The words hung in the air. Not a threat. Not a promise. Just truth. She stood up, walked toward the barn. As she passed the old oak tree by the fence, something caught her eye, carved deep into the bark, an old symbol, one she hadn't seen in years. It hadn't been there yesterday. She reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers grazed the groove, a cold chill snaked up her arm, her breath caught. Behind her, the wind whispered, one word, remember. She spun around. Nothing. Just the ranch, just the morning, just life. But deep inside her, Clara knew the land hadn't forgotten. The canyon hadn't either. She walked on. Eli waved her over, shouting, "Mama, look, I found a stone shaped like a heart." Clara forced a smile and took it in her hand. It was warm. But on the underside, there was another mark. Not natural. Not made by hands. Something older. Clara didn't show it to the kids. She slipped it into her pocket and hugged them tight. Thomas watched her from the porch, his eyes narrowed. He knew. Whatever darkness they had, silenced, hadn't vanished. It had simply moved, deeper, quieter, but still listening. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed were strangely peaceful, the kind of peace that didn't feel loud or joyous, but quiet, steady, earned. Clara threw herself into the ranch, fixing fences, feeding horses, teaching May how to hold the reins properly, and Eli how to calm the calves. The rhythm of the land returned like a lullaby she'd once forgotten the words to. Thomas helped, too. He was slower than before, more careful. But there was strength in him still, just buried under layers of pain he hadn't named yet. Sometimes, Clara caught him standing alone by the pasture, staring at the canyon. Once she asked him, "What do you see out there?" He answered without turning. "Not what's there, what isn't. That's the part that scares me." She didn't press, because she understood. The absence of something can scream louder than its presence. One evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Clara sat on the porch braiding May's hair. Eli chased grasshoppers across the yard, giggling. Thomas stepped out with an old journal in his hands. "Found this in the attic," he said, handing it over. Clara opened it, her father's handwriting. Neat, sharp, dated nearly 30 years ago. She flipped through the pages, and her heart slowed. Drawings, symbols. The same one carved into the oak tree. Her father had seen it too. One entry stood out. "There's something beneath the land. We build, we plow, we pray, but it remembers. The blood, the bargains, even the silence." Clara's throat went dry. There were sketches of the canyon's curves, strange rock formations, and entries about dreams, nightmares. A shadow watching. From the cliffs, and at the bottom of the last page, one word underlined, "Keepers." She looked up at Thomas. "I think my father knew," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "And he didn't tell anyone." Clara felt a deep ache in her chest. He was trying to protect us. Or protect it. That night, as they sat around, a small fire, May leaned against Clara's shoulder and asked, "Mama, are ghosts real?" Clara hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes, baby, but not the kind you think." "What kind then?" "The kind we carry." May seemed to think about that, then nodded, satisfied. But Eli stared into the flames, his eyes wide, and he whispered, "I saw one. Last night." Clara froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Eli looked at her. It was a man, standing by the barn, but he didn't move. Just watched me through the window. Thomas tensed beside her. Clara tried to keep her voice calm. "What did he look like?" Eli tilted his head. He had no face, just smoke where his eyes should be. The fire crackled, wind swept through the trees, and somewhere far off, maybe the canyon, maybe just their minds, a low sound echoed. Not a scream, not a growl, just a reminder that the land was still listening and that some stories don't end. They just sleep. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, the journal open beside her, her father's words echoing louder with every page. Keepers. What had he meant? At first light, she went to the attic again, heart pounding. Dust hung in the air like old breath. Boxes sat unopened for years, maybe decades. She dug through one marked church records, 1852, and beneath yellowed sermons and hymn sheets, she found something that didn't belong. A map. Hand-drawn. It showed the ranch as it once was, the barn, the house, the well. But there was something else drawn in faint charcoal, circles near the back pasture. 6 of them, with crosses etched over each, and below, in her father's careful handwriting, buried deep. 6 keepers, bound not by chains but by oath. Clara stared at it, her pulse thudding. She ran to Thomas, shoving the paper into his hands. "Do you see this?" He studied it, then looked toward the pasture. "That's near the old fence line." They saddled the horses and rode out. The morning sun hadn't fully risen yet. The air felt thick, like it hadn't been stirred in years. At the edge of the pasture, where weeds grew high and animals never strayed, Clara dismounted. She walked, counting her steps, then paused. "Here," she whispered. She dropped to her, knees brushing the earth aside. Thomas helped, and soon their hands hit something solid. Wood, old, rotted, a box. Thomas pried it open. Inside, a bundle of fabric, stiff, wrapped tight with symbols burned into it, charcoal black. Within it, a skeletal hand curled around a stone. Clara staggered back. It wasn't a grave. It was a seal, one of 6. Thomas stepped back too. "What the hell is this?" Clara held the journal tight. "My father. He wasn't just protecting the land. He was guarding it." They covered the box again, silent, but the air had changed. Colder now. And somewhere behind them, wind rustled without a breeze. That night, Clara lit a fire in the old church house on the edge of the ranch. She read from her father's notes, page after page, learning that generations ago, this land had witnessed something dark, not demonic, not holy, ancient. When settlers first came, the earth resisted. Strange deaths, disappearances, madness. 6 men made a pact to bind the force beneath and stand watch as keepers. They weren't saints, just chosen. And now, they were all gone. Clara realized something then. The canyon wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was protected by prisoners, and someone, or something, wanted them freed. She stepped outside, looking toward the distant cliffs. Thunder rolled across the sky. But there were no clouds, just shadows moving too fast to be wind. And the sound of soil shifting far beneath her boots. Clara barely slept that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt it, the earth breathing, not like wind in the trees, like something alive, buried. She sat by the window until dawn, gripping her father's journal. The eye. Word keepers felt heavier now, like a chain she hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. At sunrise, Thomas came in, dirt on his boots and shadows under his eyes. "I checked the other 5 spots." Clara looked up sharply. He didn't need to say it. "They're all there," he confirmed. "All sealed, just like the first." Clara exhaled, her mind racing. "Then whatever's under us, it's still locked." "For now," he added. There was silence. And then May screamed. Clara and Thomas bolted from the house. They found her by the barn, frozen, pointing toward the canyon ridge. A figure stood there, tall, motionless, dressed in black. It wasn't real. Couldn't be. Clara blinked. Gone. But the fear lingered in her daughter's eyes like smoke. Thomas looked at Clara. It's coming. That night, Clara sat alone by the fire pit, flipping to the final page of her father's journal. A passage stood out. One day, the seals will weaken. When the last bloodline forgets, it will rise. And the keeper must choose. Renew the vow, or let the land fall. Tears welled in her eyes. She was the last. The burden hadn't been hers to begin with. But it was now. As the stars lit the sky, Clara gathered stones from the pasture, 6 of them, and laid them in a circle, just as the journal described. She cut her palm, blood dripping onto the center. Thomas stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. No, we'll find another way. Clara met his eyes, her voice shaking. There is no other way. Eli and May stood by the porch, scared, confused. I won't lose you, Thomas said. You won't, Clara whispered. You'll remember me. She knelt, whispering the vow written by the original keepers. Ancient words, strange on her. Tongue but familiar in her bones. The wind died. The earth went still. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the canyon roared, the ground trembled, and from the distance a cry echoed, not human, not animal, just ancient. Clara collapsed. Thomas rushed to her, cradling her in his arms, but she was breathing, alive, and the seals were whole. The darkness had been pushed back, for now. As Thomas held her, Clara whispered weakly, It remembered me. He kissed her forehead. So will I. Every day. The fire dimmed, but deep beneath the soil, something stirred, watching, waiting. The land had its keeper again, but not forever. Weeks passed. The wind softened. The horses returned to grazing near the back fence. Birds sang again and the skies felt wider, bluer. But Clara was never quite the same. She walked slower, slept less. And some mornings, Thomas found her standing barefoot in the grass before sunrise, listening, like she was waiting for something only she could hear. Eli stopped talking about the faceless man. May smiled more, but Thomas knew the danger hadn't disappeared. It had only gone quiet. One evening, Clara took a walk to the canyon's edge. She stood at the cliff where the shadows used to gather, the wind brushing her hair like a whisper. Thomas joined her. She didn't turn. He's still down there, she said. Thomas didn't ask who. He just took her hand. Clara smiled, eyes distant. But he knows I'm watching now, and I won't forget again. They stood there until the sun dipped low and gold bled into the canyon walls. That night, Clara lit a single candle in the old chapel. She placed the journal beneath it, now marked with her own notes. On the last page, under her father's vow, she wrote, I am the keeper now. The bloodline remains. The land remembers. And so will I. Then she closed it. And never opened it again. Life moved forward. Thomas fixed the barn roof. May learned how to ride without falling. Eli carved little horses from wood and left them near the stones in the pasture, as if offering gifts to something he couldn't name. Clara smiled more, but her eyes always held a weight, like she'd seen something bigger than this world, and chose to carry it alone. One night, during a thunderstorm, the family huddled together in the living room. Lightning flashed, rain slammed the roof, and in a single blink, Clara saw him again, the man in black, standing far out in the field, still, silent, watching. She didn't scream. She just stood, walked to the window and whispered, Not tonight. And just like that, he vanished. Maybe a vision, maybe a warning. But Clara knew the seal was still strong. Because she was strong. The story wouldn't end in fire.